Sarah, I think it's time we had a serious talk about your role in this family during our stay here. Your sister-in-law and I have been going over the numbers, and it seems your contributions have been falling short lately. Remember when you helped us with the initial costs for this cottage? That was supposed to be the beginning of your commitment, not the end. We can't keep carrying the load while you focus on your own career and pull away from family obligations. If you don't step up now, we may have to make some difficult decisions about how we manage things moving forward. Hi, my name is Sarah Thompson. I am 35 years old. Those words from my mother-in-law landed in the middle of what was supposed to be a quiet evening at the cottage. We were only 4 days into the 2-week family getaway on the North Carolina coast, and already the air felt heavier than the humid breeze coming off the water. I had been sitting at the kitchen table sorting through some work emails on my laptop when she walked in with my sister-in-law close behind her. My husband David was still out on the porch with Rebecca, our longtime family friend, who had joined us for the first long weekend of the trip. I kept my voice even. I thought we agreed the cottage expenses were already covered for this year, Margaret. I transferred what we discussed back in January. My mother-in-law folded her arms. That was before we realised how much upkeep really costs. Jessica and I went through the statements last night. It's only fair that everyone pitches in according to their means. My sister-in-law nodded without looking at me. Mom's right. You have that steady job at the marketing firm. It makes sense for you to handle more of the ongoing costs. I felt the old familiar tightness in my chest, the same one that appeared whenever they brought up the money I had given years earlier to help secure this place. Back then, it had felt like a gesture of love, a way to be part of David's family after we married. Now it was being treated like an open tab they could draw on whenever they needed. I closed my laptop slowly. I'll look at the statements tomorrow. Right now, I'd rather not turn the evening into a budget meeting. Margaret's smile was thin. Of course, dear. We can talk more in the morning. Jessica and I will be in the sunroom if you need us. They left together, voices low, as they walked down the hall. I stayed at the table staring at the dark screen of my laptop. The cottage was beautiful, the kind of place people posted about on social media with captions about family time and making memories. But the longer we stayed, the more I noticed how the conversations always circled back to money, to who owed what to, how my contributions were never quite enough. Later that night, after David and I had gone to our room, my phone buzzed with a message notification. It was from a group thread I was rarely included in, the one my mother-in-law and sister-in-law used for family planning. The message had been forwarded to me by mistake. I opened it without thinking. The thread was full of messages from the last few days. One from Jessica stood out. She'll sign whatever we need once Mom reminds her about the cottage money again. She always folds when we bring up the past help. Just keep the pressure light until she agrees to the new arrangement. Another from Margaret. The note in the old book is still there if we need extra leverage. She never looks in the library anyway. I read it twice. My hands felt cold even though the room was warm. They had been planning this using the money I had given years ago as a constant reminder to keep me compliant. And there was something about a note in an old book. I didn't know what book they meant, but the fact that they had hidden something here in this cottage I had helped pay for made my stomach turn. I put the phone down and lay back against the pillows. David was already asleep beside me, unaware. I stared at the ceiling and tried to breathe slowly the way I had learned to do when work stress got bad. This wasn't work. This was my marriage and my place in his family, and it felt like the ground was shifting under me in slow motion. The next morning I woke early and went for a walk along the beach path behind the cottage. The air was cool and salty. I needed space to think before facing them again. When I came back, Rebecca was in the kitchen making coffee. She smiled when she saw me. "Morning, Sarah. You look like you didn't sleep much." I managed a small smile back. Just a lot on my mind. Family stuff. Rebecca poured me a cup. I overheard a bit last night. Margaret and Jessica were talking in the sunroom. They mentioned some financial thing and how you helped before. It sounded intense. I took the coffee. It's been building for a while. They think because I helped with the cottage years ago, they can keep asking for more. Rebecca hesitated, then said quietly, "Jessica said something about turning it into a family trust or something, so decisions are easier. She said you'd understand once they explained it properly." That matched the message I had seen. They wanted control, dressed up as family unity. I thanked Rebecca and took my coffee outside to the small deck. The ocean was calm that morning, but inside me the tension was rising like a tide. I spent the rest of the day keeping busy, helping with meals, joining conversations when I had to, but my mind kept circling back to the forwarded message and the mention of a hidden note. That afternoon, while everyone else was napping or out walking, I went into the small library room off the main living area. It was lined with old books that had been there when we bought the place, plus a few newer ones David and I had added over the years. I ran my fingers along the spines, not sure what I was looking for. Most of the books were novels or old travel guides. One shelf held a row of worn hardcover classics. I pulled out a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird that looked like it had been read many times. Something slipped from between the pages and fluttered to the floor. It was a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges. I picked it up and opened it carefully. The handwriting was Margaret's. It was dated from 3 years earlier, right after I had transferred the money for the cottage repairs. The note said if she ever questions the family accounts again, remind her of the cottage. She gave the money freely. We can frame any new requests as protecting what she already invested in. Jessica agrees. This keeps things simple. I read it 3 times. My hands were steady, but something inside me had gone very still. They had planned this years ago. The money I gave had never been a gift in their eyes. It had been leverage from the start. I folded the note and slipped it into my pocket. Then I put the book back exactly where it had been. I didn't want them to know I had found it yet, not until I decided what to do. That evening at dinner, the tension was thicker. Margaret kept steering the conversation toward family finances and how important it was to have everything properly organised before we left. Jessica backed her up with quiet nods and little comments about how some people in the family were too independent for their own good. David tried to change the subject a couple of times, but they circled back. Rebecca watched quietly from her end of the table. I slowly answered when I had to and kept the note and the message in my mind like 2 steady anchors. After dinner, I helped clear the table. When I was alone in the kitchen for a moment, Jessica came in behind me. "Mom's right, you know," she said, her voice low. "You've been distant lately. It hurts her. After everything this family has done for you, the least you could do is make sure the cottage stays in good hands." I turned to face her. "The cottage is in good hands. I helped pay for it. I still send money when it's needed. What I won't do is sign over control of my own accounts or let you two decide how I spend my salary." Jessica's expression tightened. "You're making this harder than it has to be. Mom just wants what's best for everyone. If you keep pushing back, it's going to affect more than just the money." She left before I could answer. I stood there with a plate in my hands, the weight of it suddenly heavy. They weren't just asking for money anymore. They were testing how far they could push before I broke or gave in. I didn't sleep well that night either. The next morning I woke to another message notification. This one was from Margaret, but it had clearly been intended for Jessica. It read, "She found the note. Rebecca mentioned she was in the library yesterday. We need to move faster before she talks to David about it. Use the group chat to remind her of the cottage money again. She always backs down when we bring it up in front of everyone." I stared at the screen. They knew I had the note. They were already planning the next move, and they were going to use the same old leverage in front of the whole family. I got out of bed quietly so I wouldn't wake David. I went downstairs, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with my phone in front of me. The sun was just starting to rise over the water. The cottage was still and peaceful on the outside. Inside, everything I thought I knew about my place in this family was cracking open. I opened the group chat they used and read the last few messages again. Then I screenshotted the ones that mattered, including Jessica's comment about me always folding and Margaret's note about the cottage money. I saved them to a private folder on my phone. When David came downstairs, he found me still sitting there. He kissed the top of my head. "You okay? You look like you've been up for hours." "I have," I said. "We need to talk. Not right now, but soon, before this trip ends." He nodded slowly. "Whatever it is, I'm here." I wanted to believe that. I really did. But after everything I had read in the last 24 hours, I wasn't sure who in this family I could still trust. The rest of the day passed in a strange, suspended way. Margaret and Jessica were overly polite at breakfast. Rebecca kept giving me small, concerned looks when no one else was watching. I smiled when I needed to and kept my answers short. Inside, I was counting the hours until I could decide what came next. That afternoon, while everyone else was scattered around the cottage, I went back to the library. I pulled out the copy of To Kill a Mockingbird again and checked the pages. The note was gone. They had taken it back. I stood there for a long moment, the empty space on the shelf feeling louder than any argument. They were moving faster than I had expected, and they still thought I would fold the way I always had before. I closed the book and put it back. Then I walked out to the deck where the ocean met the sky and let the salt air clear my head. I had the screenshots. I had the memory of every conversation. And I had the growing certainty that if I didn't draw a line now, the line would keep moving until there was nothing left of me that felt like my own. The 2-week getaway still had 10 days left. I didn't know yet how it would end, but I knew I wasn't going to spend them pretending everything was fine. The next morning, the cottage felt different, though nothing obvious had changed. Sunlight came through the kitchen windows the same way it always did, and the sound of waves carried in from the beach path just like every other day of the trip. But I moved through the rooms with a new kind of watchfulness, the screenshots from the misforwarded messages still saved in a private folder on my phone. I had not shown them to anyone yet, not even David. I wanted to be sure of what I was seeing before I pulled anyone else into it. Breakfast was already on the table when I came downstairs. My mother-in-law stood at the stove flipping pancakes while my sister-in-law set out plates. Rebecca sat at the far end of the table scrolling on her phone, and my husband was pouring coffee. The normal rhythm of a family morning, except the air between the four of us women felt stretched thin. My mother-in-law turned with the pan in her hand. Sarah, sit down. We saved you a spot. Jessica and I were just saying how nice it is to have everyone together like this. It makes the bigger conversations easier. I took the seat across from Rebecca. What bigger conversations? My sister-in-law answered before my mother-in-law could. The ones about the cottage, about making sure it stays in the family the right way. You know how Mom worries about things falling through the cracks when people get busy with their own lives. My husband glanced up from the coffee pot. Everything okay with the cottage? My mother-in-law smiled at him the way she always did when she wanted to sound reasonable. Of course, David. We just think it would be simpler if we put a few things in writing. A family trusts something clean. Sarah already helped so much in the beginning. This would just protect that investment. I kept my voice level. I already transferred money for the repairs last year and again in January. What exactly needs protecting? My sister-in-law set a plate in front of me with a little more force than necessary. It's not about the money you already gave. It's about the future. Mom and I talked to Thomas Harlan yesterday. He's the attorney who handled the original closing paperwork for this place. He said a simple trust would make decisions faster and keep everything in one place. You wouldn't have to be bothered with every little bill. The name landed like a quiet confirmation. Thomas Harlan. I had never met him, but the fact that they had already called him told me they were further along than I thought. I took a sip of coffee and let the heat steady me. I'd like to speak with him myself before anything gets drafted, I said. If he's involved, I want to hear the details directly. My mother-in-law's smile stayed in place, but her eyes sharpened. Of course, we can set up a call this afternoon. Thomas is very good at explaining these things simply. He understands family dynamics. Rebecca looked up from her phone, then her expression careful. I didn't realise you were already talking to a lawyer. Is this something the whole family is deciding together? My sister-in-law answered quickly. It's a family matter. Sarah's part of the family. We're just making sure everyone's on the same page before the trip ends. The rest of breakfast passed with small talk that circled around the same point without landing on it. My husband kept glancing at me, sensing the shift, but not pushing in front of everyone. I was grateful for that. I needed time to decide how much to tell him and when. After we cleared the table, I stepped out onto the back deck with my phone. The ocean stretched out calm and blue. I opened the folder with the screenshots again and read Jessica's words one more time. She'll sign whatever we need once Mom reminds her about the cottage money again. She always folds when we bring up the past help. They had counted on me folding. They had counted on the old guilt working the way it always had. I closed the folder and slipped the phone into my pocket just as Rebecca came out behind me. She stood beside me at the railing for a moment without speaking. Then she said quietly, I heard them last night after you went upstairs. Margaret said something about a note in a book and how you finding it changed the timeline. Jessica told her not to worry, that the message you saw would make you defensive, but you'd still sign in the end. They sounded very sure. I kept my eyes on the water. Did they say anything else? Rebecca hesitated. Only that Thomas Harlan already has a draft ready. They want you to sign it before we all leave. Something about giving your mother-in-law signature authority on the family accounts so no one has to keep asking. I felt the pieces click into place with a cold finality. The misforwarded messages, the missing note, the sudden push for a trust, the attorney already on standby. They were not asking anymore. They were moving. Thank you for telling me, I said. My voice stayed even. I needed to hear that out loud. Rebecca touched my arm lightly. You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with, Sarah, even if they make it sound like family loyalty. She went back inside after that. I stayed on the deck a little longer, letting the breeze move over me. I had the evidence. I had a witness in Rebecca. and I had the growing knowledge that my husband's mother and sister had been treating my past help as a permanent leash. When I went back and my mother-in-law was on the phone in the living room, she saw me and held up one finger, signalling for me to wait. I heard her say Thomas Harlan's name, and then, "Yes, she's right here. We can do the call now if that works for you." She covered the mouthpiece and looked at me with that same reasonable smile. "Thomas can talk to us all together in 10 minutes. He has the draft ready to email. It really is very straightforward." I met her eyes and held them. "I'll listen, but I'm not signing anything today." Her smile flickered for half a second before it returned. "Of course, we just want you to understand the options." The call happened in the living room with everyone present except Rebecca, who had gone for a walk. Thomas Harlan's voice came through the speakerphone, calm and professional. He explained the trust as a way to streamline decisions and protect the assets Sarah had already invested in. He used words like shared responsibility and family continuity. My mother-in-law nodded along. My sister-in-law took notes on a pad she had ready. When he asked if there were any questions, I spoke before anyone else could. "Mr. Harlan, has anyone explained to you that I already contribute regularly to the cottage expenses and that I was not told about this trust until yesterday?" There was a short pause on the line. I was given to understand this was a consensus decision among the family members who used the property. My mother-in-law cut in smoothly. "Thomas Sarah sometimes needs a little more context. She's been very generous in the past, but she worries about details." I kept my voice steady. "I worry about control being moved without my agreement. I'd like to see the draft before we discuss anything further." Thomas Harlan said he would email it right away. The call ended. My mother-in-law closed the laptop and turned to me with a look that was no longer entirely polite. "Sarah, you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. Thomas is trying to help. Jessica and I are trying to help. The only one creating tension here is you." My sister-in-law added, "You always do this. You act like we're attacking you when we're just trying to make things easier for everyone, including you." I stood up. The movement was deliberate. I'm going to read the draft when it comes in. Until then, I'm not discussing signatures or trusts or any changes to how money moves in this family. I walked out of the room before either of them could answer. My husband followed me into the hallway a moment later. "Sarah," he said quietly, "what's going on? Mom and Jessica are acting like you're the one being difficult, but I can tell something else is happening." I looked at him for a long moment. He deserved to know, but I also needed him to see it for himself, not just hear my version. "I found some messages they didn't mean for me to see," I said, "and a note. They've been planning this for longer than this trip. I'll show you everything tonight after everyone else is settled. Right now, I need to think." He nodded, though I could see the worry in his face. "Okay, I'm with you, whatever this is." The email from Thomas Harlan arrived an hour later. I read the draft on my phone while sitting on the edge of the bed in our room. It was exactly what I expected, language that sounded protective, but gave my mother-in-law broad authority over family assets, including ongoing contributions and decision-making power. My name was listed as a contributor who had already demonstrated commitment through past transfers. The implication was clear. I had already given, so continuing to give was framed as natural and expected. I saved the document and forwarded a copy to myself and to a private email I kept for work matters. Then I sat with the phone in my hands and let the full weight of it settle. They had not just wanted more money, they had wanted the ability to decide how much and when, with my past help used as the reason I could not object. That evening the pressure shifted into something more public. At dinner, my mother-in-law raised her glass and said she wanted to toast family unity and smart planning. My sister-in-law immediately followed with, "especially now that we're all on the same page about protecting what Sarah helped build." Rebecca caught my eye across the table. My husband stayed quiet but kept his hand near mine on the tablecloth. I raised my own glass without drinking and said, "Unity works both ways. I'm glad we're talking openly." The rest of the meal was careful. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law kept steering back to the trust in small ways, dropping Thomas Harlan's name like it was already decided. I answered when I had to and changed the subject when I could. Inside, the decision I had been circling was becoming clearer. Later, after the dishes were done and the others had gone to their rooms, I sat with my husband on the deck. The night air was cool. I showed him the screenshots first, then the forwarded messages, then the draft from Thomas Harlan. I told him about the note in the book and how it had disappeared. I told him what Rebecca had overheard. He read everything in silence. When he finished, he set the phone down and rubbed his face with both hands. I didn't know, he said finally. I thought they were just being pushy about money. I didn't realise they were keeping records of what you gave and using it like this. I didn't either, I said. Not until this trip. He was quiet again for a while. Then he said, "What do you want to do?" I looked out at the dark water. I want to finish the trip without signing anything. I want to tell them clearly that the past help was a gift, not a debt they can call in whenever they need leverage. And if they keep pushing, I want the rest of the family to see what they're actually doing. My husband nodded slowly. Then that's what we'll do. Together. The relief that came with his words was real, but it was mixed with something else. I had spent years believing that being part of this family meant absorbing the small erosions without complaint. Now I saw how much that belief had cost. The 2-week getaway still had days left. The pressure would not stop just because I had said no once. My phone buzzed on the table between us. Another notification from the family group thread. This one had been forwarded to me by mistake again. It was from my sister-in-law to my mother-in-law, sent only minutes earlier. She showed David. I saw them on the deck with her phone. She's not going to sign. We need to call Thomas again in the morning and have him explain it differently, or tell him she's being difficult so he pushes harder. She always gives in when it looks like she's the problem. I read it out loud to my husband. His face went still in a way I had rarely seen. They're already planning the next angle, he said. I put the phone down. The waves kept their steady rhythm against the shore. Inside the cottage, the lights in the other rooms were going out one by one. The long weekend part of the trip was ending soon, and the rest of the 2 weeks stretched ahead like an open question. I had the evidence, I had my husband beside me, and I had the clear sense that whatever came next, I was no longer willing to let them write the ending for me. The following morning, the cottage woke to the same soft light and distant waves, but the quiet felt loaded. I had slept little. My husband and I had stayed up late talking through everything I had shown him, the misforwarded messages, the draft from Thomas Harlan, the pattern of leverage built around the money I had given years earlier for the cottage. He kept coming back to the same quiet conclusion. They had treated my help as a permanent obligation rather than a gift. By the time we went to bed, we had agreed on one thing. I would not sign anything, and I would not pretend the pressure was normal. Breakfast was tense in a new way. My mother-in-law moved around the kitchen with careful politeness, asking if anyone wanted more coffee. My sister-in-law sat at the table, scrolling on her phone but glancing up every time I spoke. Rebecca ate quietly at the end of the table, her eyes moving between us like she was watching a slow storm form. My husband sat beside me, his hand resting near mine on the table. My mother-in-law set a plate in front of me and said Thomas will be on the line at 10. He wants to walk through the draft one more time so everyone feels comfortable. I told him you had some questions, Sarah. He's very patient with these family matters. I looked at her directly. I do have questions, but I'd like to ask them in front of everyone first. My sister-in-law set her phone down. Mom already explained it. It's straightforward. You helped before, and now we're making it official so no one has to keep track of every transfer. It protects what you already put in. My husband spoke before I could. It sounds like it protects control more than anything else. Sarah and I talked last night. We're not signing anything until we understand exactly what it changes. The room went still for a moment. My mother-in-law's smile stayed fixed, but her voice tightened. David, this isn't about control. It's about making things easier for the family. Your sister and I have carried a lot of the day-to-day decisions. Sarah's career keeps her busy. This just lets us handle the small things without constant back and forth. I reached for my phone. I think we should talk about what easier actually means here. I opened the folder with the screenshots and turned the screen toward them. This message came to me by mistake 2 nights ago. It's from Jessica to you, Mom. It says, and I quote, "She'll sign whatever we need once Mom reminds her about the cottage money again. She always folds when we bring up the past help." My sister-in-law's face went pale. My mother-in-law stared at the phone like the words might disappear if she looked hard enough. I swiped to the next one. This one is from you to Jessica the same night. The note in the old book is still there if we need extra leverage. She never looks in the library anyway. I did look. I found it. It was dated 3 years ago and it said almost the same thing. Use the cottage money as a reminder whenever I question the family accounts. My mother-in-law's voice dropped. You went through my things. No, I said calmly. I pulled a book off a shelf in a house I helped pay for. The note fell out, then it disappeared after I saw it. That's when the messages started coming to me by mistake. Or maybe not by mistake. Either way, I have them. Rebecca set her fork down. I heard some of this the other night. Margaret and Jessica talking about moving faster because Sarah found the note. They sounded like they were running out of time before she talked to David. My sister-in-law pushed her chair back. This is private family business. Rebecca, you shouldn't even be here for this. Rebecca met her eyes without flinching. I was invited for the long weekend. I'm watching family business turn into something else. My mother-in-law tried to regain control. Sarah, you're twisting everything. Those messages were about protecting you from having to manage every little expense. You've always been sensitive about money. We were trying to take that burden off your shoulders. I kept my voice measured the way I had practiced in my head all night. You were trying to take the decision away from me. You used the money I gave freely years ago as a chain. You planned it. You wrote it down. And when I pushed back, you called an attorney to draft papers that would let you keep doing it legally. My husband looked at his mother and sister. Why didn't you just ask her? Why turn it into this? My sister-in-law's voice rose, the careful politeness cracking. Because she always says no at first. She always has to make it difficult. We knew if we framed it as protecting the cottage she helped buy, she would eventually agree. She always does when it's about family. The words hung in the air. My sister-in-law realised too late what she had said. She had just repeated out loud and in front of everyone the exact strategy they had used in the messages. I turned the phone so the screen faced her. That's exactly what you wrote 2 nights ago. She always folds. You said it again just now. The only difference is this time David and Rebecca heard it without the filter. My mother-in-law stood up. Her hands were shaking slightly. This is ridiculous. You're making us sound like we're stealing from you. We're family. Family's compromise. I stayed seated. Compromise requires respect. I gave money because I loved David and wanted to be part of this family. You turned that into a ledger you could call in whenever you needed leverage. That's not compromise. That's control dressed up as love. The phone on the table buzzed. It was Thomas Harlan calling early. My mother-in-law stared at it like it was a live wire. I reached over and answered on speaker. Thomas, this is Sarah Thompson. I'm here with my husband David, my mother-in-law Margaret, my sister-in-law Jessica, and a family friend Rebecca. Before we go any further with the trust draft, I need you to know that I have evidence of a coordinated plan to use past financial contributions as pressure to gain signature authority over my accounts. I'm not signing anything today or any day that gives that authority away. There was a long pause on the line. Thomas Harlan's voice came through measured and professional. Mrs. Thompson, I was not made aware of any disagreement about the terms. If there is contention, perhaps we should pause the process until all parties have separate counsel. My mother-in-law tried to speak over him. Thomas, this is just a misunderstanding. Sarah is overreacting to some private messages. I spoke clearly. The messages are on my phone. I can forward them to you right now if you'd like to see the language yourself. The draft you sent uses almost the same framing they used in those messages. I'm declining the entire proposal. Another pause. Understood. I'll hold off on any further work until I hear from all sides separately. Margaret, I'll need to speak with you privately later. The call ended. My mother-in-law sat back down slowly. The careful mask she had worn for days was gone. She looked older and smaller in the morning light. My sister-in-law was the first to speak again. You just humiliated us in front of an attorney, in front of David, in front of Rebecca. Are you happy now? I looked at her. I'm not happy. I'm clear. There's a difference. My husband stood. Mom, Jessica, I think the trip needs to end early for us. Sarah and I are going to pack and head back today. We can talk more when everyone's had some space, but the trust and any changes to the accounts are off the table. Rebecca stood as well. I'll help you pack if you want. And for what it's worth, I won't be coming back for the rest of the 2 weeks either. I came for a family getaway, not whatever this turned into. My mother-in-law didn't argue. She looked at the table at the half-eaten breakfast, at the phone still sitting there with the screenshots open. My sister-in-law stared out the window, her jaw tight. The illusion that we were all on the same side had cracked open in the middle of the kitchen and no one could pretend it was whole again. We packed in quiet efficiency. David carried the bags to the car while I stood on the deck one last time, looking at the ocean. The 2-week getaway had lasted less than a week. The cottage would still be here. The money I had given years ago would still be part of its story. But the version of family I had carried in my head, the one where love meant absorbing pressure without complaint, was gone. On the drive back, my husband reached over and took my hand. I'm sorry it took me this long to see it clearly. I grew up thinking that was just how Mom and Jessica handled things. I didn't realise how much it cost you. I squeezed his hand. I didn't either, not fully. I kept telling myself it was small. That helping was what you did for family, but respect has to come first. Without it, the help just becomes fuel for more demands. He was quiet for a mile or two. What do you want to do going forward? I watch the road ahead. Boundaries, clear ones. We can still see them, but not on their terms. No more open-ended financial help without agreements we both set. No more assuming that saying no makes me the difficult one. And if they try to use the cottage money as leverage again, we walk away from the conversation. He nodded. I'm with you on all of it. The rest of the drive was mostly silent, but it was a different kind of silence than the one in the cottage. It felt like space opening up instead of pressure closing in. In the weeks that followed, the family group chat went quiet. My mother-in-law sent one short message about hoping we had a safe trip home. My sister-in-law sent nothing. Rebecca texted me privately to say she was thinking of us and that she had seen enough to understand why I had drawn the line. Thomas Harlan never called again. Other relatives, David's Aunt Elaine and his cousin Mark, reached out in careful, distant ways, the kind of messages people send when they sense a fracture but don't want to step into it. They were pulling back too, not out of anger, but out of discomfort with what had surfaced. I didn't chase any of it. I went back to work, to the ordinary rhythms of my life with David, and to the quiet relief of knowing I no longer had to translate every family request through a filter of old guilt. The cottage still existed, the money I had given still existed, but the power I had accidentally handed them by never pushing back had been taken back. Some nights I still thought about the note in the old book and the messages that arrived by mistake. They had planned it so carefully, so quietly. They had believed I would keep folding because that was the pattern we had all accepted. Breaking the pattern had cost something ease, the old version of family gatherings, the comfort of pretending everything was fine. But it had given me something else, the certainty that I could say no without the world ending, and that the people who truly cared would stay beside me when I did. I learned that respect is not something you earn by giving more. It is something that has to exist first, or the love becomes a transaction you can never finish paying off. Healthy boundaries are not walls against family. They are the lines that let you keep showing up as yourself instead of as the person they need you to be. Thank you for listening to my story. If this felt real to you, drop truth in the comments. Have you ever had to redraw a line with family that everyone else was comfortable leaving where it was? What happened when you did?